Hey everyone, and welcome to my build and setup of this 42-gram lightweight but shockingly powerful and agile baby toothpick by FPV Cycle. So let's have a look at the components I've chosen. Got the Caddx Ant FPV Camera, which is 14mm by 14mm. Got the FPVCycle 1202 11500 kV motors. The B-Brain V2 camera mount, which fits perfectly with this. I've got the FPVCycle all-in-one ESC and flight controller. My one came with the VTX and the receiver soldered on, but you can get the all-in-one on its own and do your own soldering. As you can see, my one has the TBS Unify Pro Nano 32 VTX and the TBS Crossfire Nano receiver. I've got the Gemfan 3018 props, the mini mortar antenna, and a linear whip antenna. So let's move on to the first part. Putting the motors on. Normally with the motors, on a lot of them you've got the 4 screws, but this frame has 2 screws, which is sufficient, especially for this size and weight. So I'm going to go ahead and put all of them on. Comes with various M2 screws, bolts, spacers, and you also get these rubber dampeners, which are useful. With this all-in-one, where the USB port is, the micro USB, place that to the back side. So I'm going to start with putting the rubber dampeners in. Place all 4 in and then onto the frame. It's always good to have various hex screwdrivers to just make the job easy rather than Allen keys. I'm doing it from the underside, so the screw will go all the way through and then layer everything on top. The board, the dampeners, the spacers, and then finally the camera mount. So I'm going to get all 4 screws and the 4 spacers on right at the bottom. So we've got 2mm of spacers. The FC mounting on this one is 25.4 by 25.4 millimeters. This all-in-one's actually made by Zeez, which is an Italian brand. Really good brand, in collaboration with FPVCycle. From all the research I've done, it's probably one of the best all-in-ones at this size. These motors actually come with the plugs, so I'm going to cut them off and then measure to see how much wire I actually need. I think it'd be good just to leave a little bit of wiggle room, not to do them too exact, just in case, because you may want to tie them down onto the arms. After you've cut them to size, I'm gonna do the ends. Personally, I don't like to leave too much wire out. Probably about maybe a mil and a half is sufficient, especially for this size of solder. So next I'm going to do all of these. Then I'm going to tin the ends to get them primed and ready. Tinning the ends, as well as putting solder on to where you're going to be soldering, just makes the job much easier. So just apply a little bit. I'm not going to go through how to do all of these particular sections. One, because I'm not probably the best at this, and also there are so many videos online where you can see tutorials of how to do tinning and soldering and tips and techniques like that. I'm just going to move through the steps of this actual build instead. Okay, once I've done that, I'm going to use a flux pen to prep the solder pads. I mean, the pen for me is good enough, but you may want to use actual like liquid flux. It just makes it much easier. So I'm going to get all the solder pads ready, so 3 for each motor. So you've got 12 pads ready and done. Once all that's done, carefully using the tweezers, I'm going to hold the end of each wire, get it right into position where the solder pad and the solder is. Just heat it up Just place them all into place. So as you can see, the wires from each motor are parallel to each other. So you've got like 1, 2, and 3. And then on each of the pads, each section, you have like a 1, 2, 3 next to each other. If you do all 4 parallel to each other soldered on, all the motors will turn in the same direction, and you'll have to change it within Betaflight or whichever software you're using. What I do is I do like the bottom left motor and the top right motor with all the wires straight, so they move in one direction. And then what you can do is with the top left and the bottom right, you just switch any of the 2 wires and you'll get the motor going in the other direction. For the most part that works. I haven't done that many builds, but with the builds that I've done, I've tried that every time and it works. For this size of a build, as I'm trying to keep the weight down, I'm going to use tape rather than some sort of wire cover to keep the wires in place. I'm going to tape it right in the middle with black tape to keep the wires safe also, just in case for prop bends or anything like that, it's not going to cut the wires. Well, not too easily anyway. I'm going to tape up all 4 sides nice and neatly. Although this is a 1S, I'm using an XT30 connector, which came with the all-in-one. So I'm going to solder that on next. Okay, so far everything looks good. So next, for the camera, on this all-in-one, that's where the position is. So we've got 3 wires coming from the camera. So you have the power, the ground, and the video out. Camera mount with the 14x14 FPV camera is actually perfect fit for this. Just gonna check to see how this is gonna fit on, how much cable I would actually need. It's always good to check just to make sure, so you don't cut it too short or you don't have it too long so it gets in the way of other things. So the same thing again. I'm gonna snip them off. Get the ends ready. It's gonna be easier if I take the plug out of the camera. Get them soldered on, then I can put it back in. Sometimes easier said than done. Same thing again. With a lot of these thin ones, you don't really need that much sticking at the end. Same thing again, tin them. Get the solder pads ready. I think it's best to always use tweezers. So now as all the wiring's done, before I ever test a battery, I always get a multimeter just to check for any shorts and to check if the currency is all going around perfectly well. Especially with these small builds where you've got solder pads next to each other, you might get the solders bridging to each other. So it's always best to be careful. You don't want to not check and then burn out your all-in-one, your ECU, your flight controller. KababFPV actually recommended XT30 1Ss, which I couldn't find anywhere, especially in the UK. He sells them himself on FPVCycle, so I got some normal ones with the JST connectors and got these XT30 ends and just changed it myself. You can find videos online how to do it. A little bit fiddly, but with a bit of practice it came out good. Okay, everything seems fine. No dreaded blue smoke. Okay, gonna put the TBS Crossfire into bind mode.
Welcome to Tango 2. Switch warning.
Gonna bind this and move on. Gonna test the VTX now as well. That all seems to be working well. Next I'm going to put the two antennas on, the linear whip and the mini mortal for the Crossfire. I want to shrink wrap these two sections, but obviously I'm going to put the antennas on first. So I've cut to size from some clear shrink wrap. Just checking to make sure the directions I want to use, where the antennas are going to go. Again, as I'm trying to keep this light, I'm not going to really use any antenna mounts or anything like that. Just use a small cable tie. Just making sure everything is fitted well. Camera mount goes over it nicely. And finally gonna prop up the screws and get the camera mount fitted on. Initially I did say I've got the 3018 Gemfan props, which I do have, but I mistakenly ordered the 1.5mm and I need the 2mm. So I've got these other 3016 Gemfans, so I'll use these for now and order the others just to finalize the project. So these 3016 props I'm putting on now, because the 3018s are ordered mistakenly. They're T-bar props, so they fit on just by squeezing them. Don't need any tools or anything like that. And that's it, there we have it. Completed Toothpick, 42 grams in total without the battery. And now let's move on to the next section. Right, moving on to Betaflight now. Most of the settings here that I'm going to be going through is directly from FPVCycle, specifically the PIDS and the tuning. FPVCycle is the company that's come up with this build and has actually produced most of the main components for this. So moving on to the ports first. As you can see, make sure UART2 0RX is turned on. Configuration tab. I've got the motor direction reversed here, and you can see the directions of each motor. Zero based receiver. CRSF for me, Crossfire. You may have a different one. Telemetry on. And the rest is kind of standard. One thing here though, my one was on one shot 125, which caused a lot of problems before I figured out that I've missed this point here. So make sure it's on D-shot 600. It was completely ruining the flight for me. So next, you've tested the receiver, it's all bound and connected. Just make sure the roll, pitch, yaw and throttle are all doing what they're supposed to. If not, you may have to check your channel map settings on your controller and make sure it matches it to the Betaflight settings. So with the modes now, as you can see, my one's set up for arm, angle, horizon and acro. You don't need to set up acro, so if you set up angle and horizon, the third switch will automatically be acro. And the way you set it up, you just click add range, and then with the sliders, you go to where you want it to be. For example, like that, or like this. So I want it there. As you can see, the little yellow dot underneath is where a click of the switch is, and then you just save. And there are lots of other features as well. If you're not too familiar with this, I'd actually look at some tutorials about Betaflight and how to do a lot of these things and which modes and other options you can add. So in the motor section, as you can see, my battery is not connected. But to test your motors, connect a battery, make sure your propellers are not connected, click the tab at the bottom right there, and then you can test each motor individually to see if they're working and they're turning in the right direction. If not, you can use software like BL Heli or other options. You can again Google this. I'll add some links also to be able to correct the direction of each motor. So now moving on to the PID tuning, got the PID profile settings here. As you can see, the data for the proportional, integral, derivative and feed forward have been tweaked here. These are the numbers which FPVCycle actually recommends. This and also the rate profile settings. I tested it on standard Betaflight and then I tweaked it to this, and this actually makes a great bit of difference, so I recommend doing it to this. I mean, obviously you might have your own preferences and you can tweak it around, but this build with the battery being underneath and it being a 1S, these quite suit it really well. So to the power and battery, so I've changed the minimum cell voltage, maximum cell voltage and the warning cell voltage. Before this, it would be warning, like within a minute of flying the warning would keep going off. Lastly, OSD, you can choose what to see on the screen here. For me, I really need to have RSSI and battery voltage, so you can choose your own ones here. I'm going to put some links below so you can see FPVCycle's page on how to do all of this stuff, and some other links in more in-depth things to do with Betaflight, PIDS and tuning. I'm gonna leave you now with some of my Maiden Flight footage. Thank you for watching and please subscribe and like.